A very warm welcome to this evening's event on Broken Republik or Broken Republic. My name is Tamara Aberle. I am the Program and Membership Lead here at the British-German Association. If you are joining us tonight for the first time and you would like to know more about what we do, please have a look on our website, britishgermanassociation.org. A brief note on technology before we start. So if you have any questions you would like to put in the Q&A, you can either put those questions in the Q&A box, which you find at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, you can also raise your hand and someone will allow you to speak during the Q&A session. Now I'm going to introduce our moderator for tonight, Andra Riemhofer. Andra is an independent German business development consultant, and her most recent book, Doing Business in Germany, How to Work Successfully with Germans, second edition, has been published in January 2025. And it's a comprehensive guide on how to interact with Germans to develop long-lasting business relationships. Now over to you, Andra.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this very interesting talk with Chris Reiter and Wilkes. It's a bit of a Zungenbrecher put together. I don't know, I can't do you really justice introducing you with the whole spectrum of your knowledge. I made some notes, what I found remarkable. So Chris Reiter, senior editor at Bloomberg, based in Berlin, if I got it right.
Yeah.
He studied international relations and political philosophy. Very nice, interesting mixture, which I suppose comes in handy now that you are reporting on politics, economics, business, what's going on in Germany. Born and raised in USA, but with a German father.
Exactly, yeah.
Who fed you Knödel, Leberkäse, and taught you to play football.
Exactly, yes.
Very good. And of course, one of the two authors of Broken Republik, or in German, Totally Kaputt. And fun fact, the Broken Republik, published with Bloomsbury, that's the same editor or the same publisher as Harry Potter. I don't know if you're aware.
Yes.
And then we have Wilkes from Frankfurt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So Will, he is currently a global business reporter for Bloomberg, covering the German economy in particular. Reporting on companies like Siemens or automotive industry.
Yeah.
And what I know about you is that you enjoy the German music a lot.
Yes, yeah, big fan of German music, yeah.
Yeah, good, wonderful. Maybe you could introduce yourself a bit more based on my first question about the book that we are talking about. So how did you come up with the idea of writing this book together? Or I mean, based on following the German society and politics, of course, maybe giving a bit more background on what you have done in the past and then how you came up with the idea to write this book together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can like kick off, I guess. Like I said, so my background in Germany is like goes back beyond my own lifespan to my father and grandfather and from my father's side. So who was born in Austria when it's part of Germany. So it's part of that exciting, time. So that my own personal history is kind of wrapped up into that. So but professionally, like I only came to Germany but like in 1999. So it's been quite a while. So I moved here initially went to Berlin when the government came over. So I kind of experienced that sort of that transition from, that aspect of reunification, firsthand when the government started here, and I came along with it when I moved from Bonn. And since then, I've followed all kinds of different aspects in Germany. Like initially I was covering energy, so there was like energy market liberalization, covered tech during the Neue Markt implosion. I covered the auto industry. I covered the auto industry again. Like I went back to the States for a while, and then I covered the auto industry during the whole Volkswagen diesel crisis. So I was like responsible for auto coverage in Europe at that time. So that took up a lot of my time and intimately involved. It was fascinating times. I was like at the Porsche plant when the VW Porsche scandal or the VW Porsche takeover was decided, and Wolfgang Porsche gave a tearful farewell, and it was pouring down rain. And so I've like experienced quite a bit of Germany through that time. So I think so there's always been a fascination. I mean, it's like been part of like who I am, even though I grew up in the States, very much like American with 4th of July parades and all that kind of stuff, Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, you know, all that. You know, my mom comes from Iowa, which is about as American as you can get, corn-fed, Midwest. So very different like upbringings from the beginning. So, and then I've had kids here in Berlin. They're all Berliners, so that's a different situation. I've had to deal with schools and everything else. So I think like that personal background and that experience is like sort of, you know, motivated certainly like wanting to take a bigger look at Germany beyond just like the daily news. So yeah, that's kind of like how it started from my side. Like it's been decades in the making, quasi.
Okay. Will, what about you?
And on my side, we don't have any confirmed family connections with Germany, although there is a story on my mother's side that wasn't able to confirm properly in the book, that some of the family had were from Aachen and came over to England sometimes in the 19th century. I grew up in the north of England, and my first contacts with Germany were kind of the usual ones for a British person, good British child growing up in the 90s, kind of old war stories, but also at that time already, I think the attitudes to Germany were changing quite a lot, because you had Jürgen Klinsmann had come over and was playing football in the Premier League. Michael Schumacher was very famous, and you had kind of German music was also kind of there in the background. And I think post reunification Berlin was starting to become quite cool. So I've got a very British connection to Germany, and then moved. I studied German and Italian at university, and worked as a Fremdsprachassistent in Dormagen, which is there's like a big biochemical works there. And actually before that, I'd also been in Nordrhein-Westphalia on a school exchange, and worked at the Westfälische Rundschau, which is a now sort of half defunct newspaper in Western Germany. And then I moved over for good here in 2015 to Frankfurt with the Wall Street Journal, then worked in Berlin for a bit, met my wife, and we settled in Frankfurt. My wife's not German, she's from Italy, so our two children now have total Migration Hintergrund. And yeah, so I live in Frankfurt and mine, but doing my job, spend a lot of time mainly in the Ruhrgebiet or in southern Germany around Stuttgart, but also traveling to East Germany and Bremen and other places in Germany where there's industry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And at one point you guys must have met or worked on an article together, and then you had this idea to write a book together. How did that go?
Well,
Yeah. Sorry, do you want to go ahead?
yeah, we've been writing stories together for quite a while. I think because Chris will give a more detailed explanation about why we chose to write the book, but actually on this when we actually specifically discussed it for the first time, we were at a steel plant at Salzgitter, and it was kind of like the tail end of the pandemic, and also right after the energy crisis. So there was a lot of kind of distress in the German steel industry. So we went on a plant tour, met some steel workers and management there, and then we went to a cafe by the train station and first discussed writing the book. But
Yeah.
Chris might give a deeper thing into why we wrote the book.
Well, yeah, it's sort of at that point because we, like Will said, we'd done a number of stories together, and at that time it was the winter after the energy crisis, and there was all this in the fall. We were writing a lot of stories about how Germany was threatened with, you know, shutting factories down, rationing gas, like who gets heat during the winter and things like that. And so And then through, there was like rapid action in terms of like setting up a lot of LNG terminals, and in sort of like long story short, like Germany made it through the winter without having to shut down. There wasn't gas rationing, there wasn't a shortage. So, and it was sort of a feeling at that point where that the sense was like Germany again escaped crisis. It pulled its head out of the noose one more time. And both Will and I kind of like from observing and reporting on the, on industry in the country and seeing how politics were developing, that we thought, like that's not the way things are. Like there's a lot of cracks beneath the surface. There's a veneer of stability that looked like it was cracking. And so when we started writing the book, that was kind of, it was almost like, well, we had to justify the crisis that there's actually a crisis beneath the veneer of stability. And so in the course of reporting and writing on, like the cracks have like began to surface, like, and they became undeniable by the time it came out. And so our thesis was, we didn't have to argue before the crisis that like Germany was like actually like having a lot of issues that are beneath the surface. It's just that they came bubbling out. So in that sense, we were already prepared, to explain kind of what was going on beneath the surface by the time the book came out. And I think so that's been like, it came out just after the election. And so we were writing it, we pushed forward the publisher pushed forward the publication date after the Ampel, the Schultz government fell apart. So there was a bit of rapid turnaround there. But kind of everything that has happened since then has just continued to sort of feed into sort of the ideas and sort of like explaining how Germany is in crisis. It hasn't unfortunately gotten particularly better since then. So that was the genesis really, was like that visit to the steel plant and Germany sort of escaping crisis one more time. And that we thought like that it kind of needed to be sort of made clear that there's a lot of issues that haven't been dealt with, that have been swept under the rug. So that was the genesis.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I was diving into the questions because I read the book shortly after it came out. I totally enjoyed it. I must have been reading and nodding all the time, and really appreciate how deep you dig, how well researched it is with lots of endnotes, and one could really see that you have been dealing with these topics you described for 20 and more years. And still, I find the book very, it takes kind of a light-hearted view. It's almost humorous. So I'm thinking maybe that's a very German question. Do you find that is the right approach to address such a serious topic?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think because otherwise it would become too dark, so you have to have like a bit, and when you're like approaching a topic, I have to say like it was like awe-inspiring to like think about that you're writing about an entire country, a very complex country with a very complex history. It's a complex present, so you have to have a bit of humility and empathy, at the same time for the subject that you're writing about. At least like, I mean, I do find there's like another approach that's very sort of like high-handed, but I think like we just had, because at the end of the day, like the book is critical about the state of Germany, but it's also, we have skin in the game ourselves. So, and we can never, no one can ever like with all 100% know every little aspect of a country as complex as Germany. So you have to have a little empathy and sympathy and humility about it when you're writing something so complex. And then also, if you're gonna try to make a point, you have to have like the hope is that people take what we're writing with, like that it sparks a bit of thought and hopefully like a bit of reflection and then a bit of ultimately change. I mean, our goal is not to bash Germany and write it off. The goal is to actually say Germany can be better than sometimes it thinks of itself,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you need a bit of that, like, I like personally, one of my favorite lines that I wrote in the book is like about identity, and that I compare identity as like layered, like like a Black Forest cake.
Yes, yes, yes.
So it's also a lighthearted way, but it's also something that people can understand. Everybody knows a Black Forest cake. But yeah, you can have different ways. So I mean, yeah, so I think, yeah, a little levity, kind of is important when something as serious as Germany is.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that makes, if somebody is open to read the book, I could imagine if somebody, how to put it? I mean, if you're really interested and you want to learn, then it's a nice approach also for the reader to connect to your ideas rather than somebody bashing or lecturing. I mean, then you can put the book away and you would not really be open for also the positive ideas you give and the suggestions that we can maybe also discuss a bit more. But let's focus a bit more on the problem. So I made some notes from the book, and at one point, for example, you write, escaping Germany's problems would be easier if the country openly discussed its issues with humility. Yet many elites are slow to recognize the malaise, lulled into false sense of comfort by the country's self-delusion. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think for a long period, even now, you have worsening things like inequality in Germany, and there's often a tendency from people to say, well, it's things aren't better elsewhere, or that's not true, or the trains, well, maybe people have given up a bit on
that we can agree upon, I guess.
People have changed their mind on the trains, but there is a desire there seems to maintain in public, like the sense that things aren't that bad, and people don't need to worry, and we can all get back to a kind of ideas of Wohlstand für alle and Germany being an ordered place. And I don't think, there's not enough discussion with humility that actually Germany has a lot of unresolved issues in a world that's changing quite rapidly and is testing kind of traditional ideas of national identity and economic crises that aren't going away, that are global in scale and which Germany has little influence over. And I think this still remains, you still see it quite often, this kind of sense that German virtues, which are supposedly unique to Germany, will reassert themselves and everything will be fine. But I think increasingly that sense is even cracking among the population, and people are asking more questions.
So this is interesting. That is what I observe, also working a lot with international companies, of course, looking at Germany, that I feel sometimes the Germans are very self-confident about what has been achieved in the past with the engineering, and we are pünktlich and we do things properly, and in other countries things are not that great. That is often an attitude. And interestingly enough, when I talk to internationals and who hold the made in Germany very highly, and I start talking about Deutsche Bundesbahn, for example, I recently almost got in a fight with one of my US clients. I said, please plan buffer, no trains are pünktlich. So I feel sometimes people from abroad don't like it when I scratch on this shiny surface. Anyway, but I really loved also this part of the book where you gently deconstruct and analyze and suggest to do a bit more of self-reflection.
Yeah. I mean, you can see it in things like approach to education. Sometimes there's still like a sense that, perhaps in other countries it's not done as well. Whereas obviously Germany's falling behind quite a lot in digital education, and you have like this great inequality on it depends which Bundesland you're in, determines a lot your life chances in that. And it doesn't feel that even after the PISA shock that there's properly, it's maybe more a thing at state level, but people are still not willing to kind of say that maybe in Hessen things don't work quite as well as they should, or in other Bundesländer. And
just an anecdote in education, since we're on education. One of my so when I went to school when I was like about the age that my son is right now, so that was like more than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, right? We learned computer programming in school. We didn't have a home computer. There was no internet. We didn't have a mobile phone. But in my just public school in suburban Chicago, we did computer programming, a few times a week. So, and my son doesn't have any of that. So, and that's kind of the thing where I kind of ask myself, so why does Germany think it's going to get ahead and catch up in digitalization when it's not even preparing the kids today for these sort of skills? And so when every like politician, this buzzword digitalization comes up, and you're like, you guys are really not doing anything for it. So yeah.
And I mean, you have also already briefly touched upon the divide in well-being of people and the German virtues. And there is one other part in the book, or one of my favorite sentences, where you write, while well-off Germans, it's about searching a place to stay, while well-off Germans openly play the system, others get bypassed. Low-income families don't have the resources to invest in a surge, and foreigners have had the idea drummed into them, I love this sentence, drummed into them, that this is a country of order and rules need to be followed. So that's quite dynamite. What is it? What you describe in this part of the book? We still want people to buy the book and read it, but
yeah, yes, please. Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot in that to unpack. I mean, I think there's a couple things that, for one, things like that Germany is like struggling with inequality in a way that it's like that it cuts at the core of who the country thinks of itself, and that and that goes back to like the state's role to kind of guarantee social welfare in terms of Wohlstand für alle and shared prosperity. So, and that puts like the state, that puts such like a heavy burden on the state, but then also some of those, what we go into about rules is that, and that it's not so much about rules and that Germany needs so much as it values structure. And it wants to know what the structure is, but it doesn't necessarily, I think like that's one of the things that I think I learned, took me a long time to figure out here, is that the rules aren't so as important, and that Germans break rules all the time, but they want to know what the structure is, even if it's for them to get around them. And I think there is that assumption when you're a foreigner, you're like, oh, well, we have to do things by the book because that's the way it is here in Germany. But then you learn that the Germans actually have like sort of a bit of a secret workaround sometimes, they, like when it comes to like a Hausarzt, how do you get a doctor's appointment? How do you do that? And, and when it comes to, sort of, I think one of also the examples was like daycare. It's like, how people get daycare places, where you think you're supposed to follow these rules, but there's actually all this like sort of kind of black market system or gray market system where people get things done actually. And so, but it's still, and that goes back to this sort of need within German society for structure. And I think that kind of goes back to this idea of kind of this fragile identity, because there's not this understanding that that you treat one another as like human beings and as like you're in it together. There's very much like, so it's very fractured, I think, society, and there's a lot of bubbles in it. And, and so when you come here as like an outsider and you expect rules to work, and you think you just have to figure out what the rules are and then it'll all work. And then you realize it's not quite that way. So that's, like that's kind of one of those things, but like, and then it goes to the system where there is very much a two-tiered system, or at least two-tiered system. There's a very hierarchical system within Germany, and that things are, there are privileges for certain people that have, and it's very connections based, and that's something that I think for like outsiders and for, Germany that itself, like I don't really think like Germans just understand how it works, but it's like, and it works for some people better than it does for others. And that's been built into the system.
And this is also interesting for Germans to read the book, because if you are in your own bubble, you may not even be aware that the system is like you just described. Because you say it works. I mean, my neighbor is a dentist, and I know I'm in the committee of the kindergarten, so what's the problem?
Yeah. Well, it was like during COVID, I knew, people in my vicinity that who knew how to jump the queue to get COVID shots before other people did, you know? And so if you're a foreigner, you would just say, okay, I just need to, they'll come to me once it's my priority levels there, but the rules are made to be broken. And so one of my examples is like, and Will could probably empathize, and probably anybody in the UK can empathize with this, is that Germans and standing in a queue is a nightmare. Like it just doesn't work automatically like it does in the UK. And and there's always this nervous energy whenever there's like, unless there's a very clear defined line of how it's supposed to work, there's instead of like a nervous sort of energy, and it's just this feeling because everybody's worried about somebody else cutting in line because they know they would do the same thing if they had the chance, So I think it's one of those things that makes kind of like social interaction kind of a bit awkward and tense. But standing in queue in Germany is an adventure.
It was interesting, like my gym yesterday, they have this, they call it e-gym, with where you can check in and then they adjust the weights. And now they want people to use the gym in a certain order, limiting the time. It was so funny. So there was this elderly guy and me, and I was not caring about these rules because it was anyway not packed. And he said, you are also actively ignoring the rule. And I was not even reading it. And then I was talking to the trainer. I said, can't people rely on people being decent, not checking their phones forever? And can we just not figure it out ourselves? And the answer was, sorry, but at the gym they want to do it. We can't decide. The chain, they decided they wanted in Austrians. How screwed up is this? Anyway, but maybe pretty much describing what you were also talking about.
Yeah. So that reliance on structure and responsibility, and everybody can be like, oh, it's not my thing, and pass the buck, and and that's kind of a thing where it's like, it can be different. You can decide to do different, and you can be a bit more, just try to help each other out and just like, work it out between yourselves. Not everything has to be so rigid. So.
And just to add to that, this is a lot of these interactions with the state or other people were maybe like not like, this wasn't such a big deal during like boom years or periods after the war when things were like going quite well. And I think a concern is going forward, if because of demographics and because of kind of the economy struggling more than people have been used to, and more kind of global competition, that then does this become it's a bit more, I think, politically potentially explosive, that you have people cutting queues, and then you have an increasing sense of the section of society that thinks people don't abide from them, people are out for themselves. And to those kind of people, if you shut out of all these little things, because it could be access to medical care, access to childcare. Also, you have the thing with the company car scheme in Germany, where if you're part of you have this very generous company car scheme if you work for a company, but then you might be shut out and you can't afford a car in other ones. I think it kind of potentially that creates a group of people who are who then can become very perceptive to anti-systemic and anti-democratic voices who say, like, really, the system isn't fair, it doesn't work, it doesn't work for you, it does work for other people. I think it's one atmospheric thing in society that is becoming increasingly concerning, I think.
And like, for example, you are also discussing, yes, there is a political freedom, but when people are not doing well economically, then it can also be difficult.
Yeah, so, I mean, that goes to what Will was just talking about. I mean, because because if you don't have economic choice, and if you don't have like what Will was saying, it's like as there's been stagnation in the economy for the last, or actually shrinking for the last couple of years on an annual basis, and then so the choices that people have are limited. You don't get to, you take the job that you can get, you take the apartment that you might be able to afford or that you might be able to find. And if the feeling is that your ability to choose and to like evolve and advance, or you're barely hanging on, and then it's like, so the ability to choose between one party or another doesn't have that much appeal if you think you're like screwed one way or the other, and so, and that's something that I think that goes across, Western democracies at the moment. And that's why you see like kind of this upswell and populist movements from, obviously from Italy is already in power. And then like the UK is very much like Reform UK is leading the polls. Like you have Marine Le Pen and like in National Rally, like sort of knocking on the door. You have obviously Trump's already taken over. So, and you have like this disconnect between the people and power. And that's really problematic. So that's not something that's unique to Germany, but like one of the things that, we kind of try to point out in the book is that like Germany is not sort of like unique to a lot of and that's sort of one of the frustration when Germans say, well, it's bad other places too. But the problem like with Germany is that Germany has kind of its social, like its identity construct is so limited. And so, and there is that reservoir of ethnic national mythology that exists that is being tapped into right now from the AfD in terms of the folk, They don't say it often all that loudly and that clearly, but it's definitely there when you listen to certainly like someone like Björn Höcke. That this appeal to like 1,000-year folk and this like a cultural identity that's like pure and clean and that that survives regime changes. So that's why, so in Germany, when it's like the populist movement becomes, it's not just anti-establishment for new, like a new sort of going more nationalist, but it's like the risk that it goes farther because there's like less that holds the nation together itself. And that's kind of the risk of so like that the economic struggles and the fact that like working class people and like inequality is getting worse across like lots of other countries, but just what's happening in Germany just makes it so much, and Germany's like cultural history and the fact that like its post-war history hasn't given it that robust sort of civic identity and sort of like that ability as like the nation to rally together towards like a common end, a common goal. And I feel like that's kind of what we're seeing right now with the Merz government, that there's some struggles there to develop a vision to bring the whole country forward.
And this was one, I mean, that was really enlightening reading your book. So when I was in my book, there is a small chapter about the history. And then I also talk about reunification and talking about identity in maybe 2-3 sentences where I say, oh, what was it that what we had, the Deutsche Mark, that is something we could identify with, or maybe the made in Germany, but the Deutsche Mark is not there anymore. And since the diesel scandal, the made in Germany maybe is also not that shiny anymore. Full stop, next chapter. And then I read your book where you are really very much talking about all the cracks in the system and what could glue it together, and where you really talk a lot about this. What is holding Germany together, what has been holding it together, this promise, Wohlstand für alle, which now is not there anymore. And you are coming up with some nice suggestions also how to maybe heal this lack of common identity.
Yeah. Sorry, Will, you want to?
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah,
so my questions are maybe a bit, I talked too long, and then is it a question, is it a statement? Sorry, that was a question, an invitation to talk about what you wrote in your book, or what you think about the German feeling of togetherness or German identity.
I think the best thing you could say about contemporary German national identity seems very fragmented, and there's no there are too few rallying points, and as what it really needs, and this is perhaps not the only country like this, you need to like a forward-looking and progressive, cohesive, civic national identity. And what I think with the solutions, what we were trying to do as well is not have that done, try and come up with things that aren't about politicians giving speeches and not coming from the top down, like something that can swell from the bottom, because you have to, for people to believe in them, you have to kind of have people have to kind of take part in it, agree with it. It's like more of an organic thing that can be ordered from top down, but it was very much trying to focus on fun, slightly, some of the suggestions were a bit tongue-in-cheek, things that could bring people together in a more kind of community way that cuts across social, economic boundaries and isn't kind of ordered from the top down. But
just what Will's alluding to is Spargelzeit.
I didn't want to do a spoiler.
Not a spoiler alert, but but sort of some of the point is like about being in Germany is that there's not a lot of like things to be together with that cross national boundaries, that cross social, economic, and religious boundaries. Like tomorrow, it's October 3rd. It's National Day. It's going to take place in Saarland, which is about as far as the Berlin Wall and the inner German boundary border as you can get. Basically, it's on the border of France. And they'll have like a few days of festivities with like kind of Volksfest kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's every place else besides this one place in Saarland, which is tiny, small, like it's not the middle of Germany. It's kind of there's no activity around it, and there's nothing to do with it. So if you're not actually in Saarland, in Saarbrücken, where it's taking place, it's just going to be a day off, and people have coffee. It'd just be like a Sunday. The stores are closed, so you go for a walk or you have coffee and cake, that's what you do. And so and to have a bit more, so a bit more sort of what we saw like pathways to community, like low threshold kind of things where people can take place and feel a part of something. And also I think there's a certain aspect where, because Germany has left the sort of national identity vacant, and there's that void there, then the AFD, it's like opens a field for the AFD to adopt sort of patriotism as their thing. And so they're the ones that get to wave the flag, and they're the ones that, kind of play also with like sort of, Nazi kind of symbols or slogans and things like that. Like, like it was Alles für Deutschland, also Alles für Deutschland. It's like very that play on words with like an SS or
in English,
SA.
everything for Germany, maybe we need to translate this.
Yeah, so like it was, so everything for Germany, which is like a one of the many banned Nazi symbols. And I think like one of those problems is that now 80 so years since the end of the Nazi dictatorship, is that there's really nothing fundamentally like bad with saying, like if Dennis Schroeder of the German national basketball team, which has won the world championships and won the European championship this year, a Black German from Braunschweig, incredibly charismatic figure, if he said like, like we're going to do everything for Germany, then it has a totally different meaning. And it's like you can take that back. You don't have to give up power over some of those symbols. And like the flag, I think, could be, Germany in that sense, like has to retake some of its national symbols, like, make waving the flag okay. Like it was okay in 2006 during the World Cup, but like sort of retake some of that national symbol, like retake some, actually, like manifest some national pride. There's things you can do. And so that's why a lot of it is not like, like our, we could, there's like, so in our suggestions and proposals, they're kind of low threshold sort of things. It's sort of like attacking certain issues or approaching certain issues like housing. Housing is such a huge issue. Like if a society cannot shelter its people, is it a society? Like, is it a civilized society? And so that's a huge problem, and that creates all kinds of anxiety in lots of other ways. So like housing is one of our suggestions, and it's also like then because Germany used to do it really well. You used to have like great social housing projects for like over hundreds of years. And certainly in the 1930s, like there was lots of social housing built. And so like, but they've let that go, and because um, for years, and they've like relied on the market, but like the state at the same time is so central to people's sense of well-being. So the state needs to show some action and show it can get things done. And so also like our proposals, like also to rebalance wealth, because wealth inequality is a huge issue. And so because most people rent in Germany, you build for home ownership, like you provide a pathway, you make it easier for people to buy. So you give people, like if you can do things that show people that they have a stake in society again, and that's kind of the problem, the way Germany works right now. They're like, most people are looking at the state, like, what are you going to do for me? And the problem is like, so when if Germany gets the economy rolling again, like next year, we'll probably, like just by virtue of the spending that's going to happen, there's going to be a certain amount of growth, like 1.4%, but if 90% of that growth goes to 10% of the population, you're not winning anything out of that. And that's the risk of like a very fiscally driven kind of approach to, and if you look at GDP as the main driver, because that GDP isn't going to trickle down to like most of the people. So if you don't have sort of programs in place that like, if you don't have a vision, like sort of a direction, where do you want to go as a society? What is it like to live in Germany these days? If you're like, because right now you're a working class kid, you're going to go to a bad school, you're going to end up getting a job that's like not very secure. You're going to live in an apartment where you're paying a landlord from probably overseas, or at least not in Germany, or at least you don't know who it is. Will probably take up an increasingly amount of your paycheck over time, living in anxiety that if you lose your job and you can't pay your rent, you'll be out on the street. And then, a state pension that may or may not be there by the end of it, so that's like sort of the German reality. And so to kind of recast a German dream that used to be like a lot like Germany traded choice for stability, but now that stability is not there and the choice isn't there either. And so that has to be kind of rebalanced about where does Germany get its sense of focus, its sense of self, and and to be able to pivot towards the future, because there's a lot. So going on a bit too long, but there's too much in Germany that's so focused on the present, like, and preserving the present. And the risk is right now with this money that's being spent that a lot of money will be going to industries that aren't really competitive over the long term. Just one example that like happened just as as we were writing the book was like the Meyerwerft. So a shipbuilder was saved, and there was like no kind of real debate about it, but it was saved because it was like tens of thousands, like maybe 16,000 jobs or something at the end of the day, like attached to the shipbuilder, which is important, but they just make cruise ships. It just needs a lot of, and the contracts that they have are all underwater because the contracts weren't flexible enough to account for raising prices of stuff like steel, And so the state is like saddled now with like this shipbuilder of cruise ships for like AIDA cruises or Disney cruises or whatever, like environmental catastrophe that's going to probably at the end of the day cost several billion, when it's all said and done. But the ownership family still has the right to get to buy the company back once it's all fixed with taxpayer money. And they had moved the company to Luxembourg to not pay German taxes. So everything about it is a little bit bonkers. But like but it's like sort of this knee jerk. We have to like preserve things that aren't necessarily competitive. So and I think like that ability to kind of look forward and not like and I've sort of been making the argument that Germany has to give up on the auto industry. And
Sorry.
like that's a bit, I'll
But
stop there.
I found it so funny yesterday when it was announced what Merz and his crew decided on initiatives to bring the state forward. And I don't know, is it these guys, is it the media? But everything I heard was now you can register your car digitally, and you don't, and I thought, okay, what else? Why the
Yeah.
car? Is it the expectation that every German will now buy a car because it's so easy to register?
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah. The one good thing out of that, they did say that you should be able to start a company within 24 hours. So that was like, I thought that's progressive. Okay, like let's see how that works.
Yeah, stimmt.
But-
What's the second
but-
thing?
That's true, and there's positive things in that in these packages. But again, it does show that the kind of public discussion and the ideas for solutions are a bit too focused on like attempts to restore Wohlstand for alle, and the idea that you go back to if the economy's going well, then Germans are all going to be happy and stuff. And I think going back to the solutions and on national identity, I think it's a problem that, while I can understand a lot of people might not want to talk about it, but it's kind of being forced on it's something that a discussion Germany needs to have for several kind of external reasons, partly because I don't think, we're in the 21st century now, and like 100 years or 80 years since the invention of the jet engine, I don't think global telecommunications, migration's not going to go away, and Germany doesn't really have like a national identity that outsiders can kind of attach themselves to, and so that needs some work. And also, obviously, the AfD is pushing a national identity story, and it's going to be very, very difficult election campaigns for anyone who's either centre right or centre left, or to kind of go there with this very weak thing, maintain status quo, vote for us, we're just going to manage things as they steadily get worse, is very weak compared to the kind of, for some people, the more aggressive and more concrete national identity the AfD's promoting in areas. And it does kind of show the need that Germany, talking about the solutions of the book, you need to have a strong alternative, inclusive and progressive offer on national identity. And these focusing on economic solutions and the fact that you're going to have a big infrastructure package that kind of also hasn't been that defined. Like it's not all about money, I think, is an important point to make.
Should we go to the questions before
Yeah.
it gets too?
Yes, we just have
I
10
think
minutes
Tamara.
left. I just wanted to remind all attendees, if you want to put a question forward, please, you can put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. There are already 3 questions there, and you can also raise your hand if you like, and I'll allow you to speak if you prefer that.
Yeah, good, Tamara, because I can see webinar chat, but no questions. So good, you spotted them.
Oh,
Maybe
right. Yes. Would you like me to read them?
Yes, because for me it's in Zaubertinte, in magic.
Oh, right.
I can't
It's
see
just.
any.
Oh, right.
I can see them.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Would you prefer to read them out? That's probably easier. Or I can do it. I don't mind.
Sure, I can do like I think Anna, right? Yeah, like so. Do you think Merz, with his business experience outside of politics and his modernization agenda, are the right response to the lack of initiative malaise you're describing? I think I think that there has been some positive things that Merz has done. Like he changed, he pivoted like quite hard on the US. Like he was very pro US, and he's kind of he's understood excuse me, at this point, that the Trump administration is not going to be wooed by a birth certificate of his grandfather, or was his grandfather, right? That his attitudes toward Germany and Europe are not positive. So the thing is, I think like there is like some risks with Merz, and like that he's a bit too confident in himself and things like that. He just needs to get growth going again and GDP going again. And I think there is that risk of not, what I would appreciate him you know, is some of these softer issues that we talk about in terms of identity and understanding that GDP doesn't get everybody else, like everybody in the GDP growth doesn't necessarily help everybody, and so that and the like debate around migration, I don't think is necessarily positive, because Germany needs migration, it needs like skilled migration, and it needs to you know, in order to make up for the baby boomers that are retiring, like 400,000 people a year, net migration is what the number is discussed. And when there's that focus on migration, and it sort of validates the talking points of the AfD, and so there's a lot of things that, you know, and then the debate about social welfare reform, and that, which is like, there's a lot of people that just increases the anxiety of people that are like either in social welfare or feel at risk of falling into that category, when at the same time Germany doesn't do a lot to tax inheritance. There's no wealth tax for like since the late 1990s. And you know, a lot of things to show, you know, like that he could do more to show that he's like the chancellor of all of Germany and not just the CDU voters. So like those are things like, I think his you know, he banks on his business acumen a lot, but there's a lot of things that go beyond business that are like, you know, more about that feeling of being seen and belonging within Germany, that I don't know if he has he hasn't entirely shown that he has the wherewithal or know-how to adapt. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. Will, do you want to read the other one or the next one, or?
I can't see the question. If you
Okay. So this is from Carl Wright. I found Broken Republic a very stimulating read. Thank you very much. But would like to ask the authors if they have underestimated and not taken into account the key impact of the EU on German life. On page 153, you briefly mentioned the major economic benefits for Germany, but what about the deep political and cultural attachment to the European linkages, for example, through thousands of town-city twinnings and school exchanges each year? Surely even the appalling nationalism and racism of the AfD would have difficulty in breaking this fundamental post-war European identity.
I think that yeah, that's correct, and that is a major part of post-war German identity. But I think, well, it's definitely strong. There are lots of signs that the European ideal is weakening, and people are less and less interested in it. And it would wonder whether young people buy into that in quite the same progressive way that it was that there was the post-war dream had. And you can also see, to an extent, the AfD are quite happy to use the idea of European, meaning white, Christian, and from with kind of European ethnic heritage. So I think the European thing would need more energizing again, and it's not something that Germany should be careful not to just think that, you know, people are going to be hymning the praises of the Coal and Steel Pact for like another 30 years. I think it needs to be, Germany needs to re-energize Europe and its commitment to Europe, and that would be one thing that Merz could do on the economic front, would be make a kind of all-out and big bet on Europe. And I think it's a bit of there's been a couple of missed opportunities there already. Like when talking about defense, it's all about, oh, we'll make Germany the most powerful conventional military in Europe again, in Europe, instead of saying, you know, why don't we make a big push for like a pan-European solution to it. So yeah, I think that's the point about it. I think we would acknowledge that Europeanism is a major element of German post-war identity, but I think it is fading and cracking, and it needs revivification. Kind of, it needs a new injection of energy.
Yeah, I would back that in. And then you see a little bit of division on that already, when in terms of like, because and there, like, this will go into, like, Anna is like referencing this like modernization bureaucracy revisions, that modernization pact, or whatever they called it, like a couple of days ago. Was that, so Germany's moving ahead, like, you know, so they've seen your bureaucracy needs to be like changed, and they have like that new digitalization, like modernization of the state with Wildberger, who's like a former CEO of this economy, like MediaMarkt and Saturn parent company. So like that's a good initiative. Like it's a good start, and but it's always like in the implementation that matters. But like, and you see already like Merz is kind of throwing the EU under the bus, which is like crosses that like in terms of blaming the EU for bureaucracy. So there's like the EU is also like has become also a whipping boy for Germany in terms of like its problems. So and and unfortunately the risk is as things get more difficult, and you see that already, like that Germany pays a lot into the EU budget. So if things are going well here, it's the same kind of thing that happened with Brexit, where at some point, it's like, oh, if all that money wasn't going to Brussels, then we'd be better off. So the risk is that, as Will was saying, that the EU kind of ties sort of start being be conveniently politicized, and especially the cost.
Yeah.
I'll just ship to the next one. So Ian McMaster, thank you for the question. What is your prediction for where Germany will be like economically and socially in 10 years' time? That's a good one. I hope it's in a better place, honestly. It's hard to see like what I see is, unfortunately, is like looking at what the turnaround, what's the catalyst for the turnaround, where the political leader is going to come from. Are people going to believe in the political, like right now the CDU, the political center, CDU, SPD is like losing authority, losing credibility. Can it turn it around? I do think you sort of, personally, I feel like it needs a bit of, Germany needs a bit of like fresh wind, like a lot of other democracies needs a new program. So I would like to be optimistic that it will be better, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Well,
I think what will be interesting in 10 years is these problems on demographics and the kind of fading of old traditional manufacturing industries that Germany's done well in, and also this very large welfare state, are all going to come under immense pressure over the next few years. And I think it really is what happens in this parliament and the next, and what people, developments in broader society over the next years will be critical in seeing whether Germany goes a path of starting to get in kind of incremental improvements that then compound and everyone feels kind of better off and has found solutions to its major challenges, or whether it goes down a path of becoming increasingly fractured and bad-tempered. And I'd be probably more optimistic about that than you might think. And I think a big part of our book was, I think we do believe that if Germany can bring in kind of incremental change and positive change, then some of these major challenges on social cohesion and on the economy that it's facing, it can resolve them. But it needs to kind of take action, and people need to start taking more risks, and people need to unpack. And
should we? Yeah, we'll have kind of a speed round and we're happy to stay if people want to stay.
I'm also happy to stay.
Okay, so how much is Germany more complex? Germany's more complex identity, a product of late unification, the 1870s, and has a more complex multinational identity from Saxony to Saarland. I think that's like an excellent point. Germany was hardly a nation, was hardly unified, so it never really had this nation building, and then it went to the most grotesque nation building possible by just making war on other countries. And so there's very little German nation building that took place before World War I, and then obviously World War II. And I think the Weimar Republic was actually incredibly positive period that Germany could still tap into for a lot of national pride and ideas for where it goes next. I'll just go to the next one. Timo Holtappels, in regard to Wohlstand and national identity, how much would you say in all your experience the German education systems are responsible for the breaking of our federal system and thus the republic? Will, do you want a quick?
Yeah, I think the education system, I think, as we write in the book, definitely reinforces regional divisions, and that would be another thing. I think to have a national education system would be fantastic, and that you close some of the gaps. I think some of the starkest are between Bremen and Bavaria. And that yeah, if you had more national standards and more of a national curriculum and kind of national education things, then you could that would probably do a lot to
Yeah.
iron this
And
down, bring
and
people
just to
together.
that point, to expand, is that like private schools are on the rise in Germany, which is sort of like another kind of, two-tier hierarchical system that sort of risks sort of breaking down that, like, sort of what was, education should be, like a pathway for lower class, working class people to move up the ladder, but it hasn't been. And it's because of the way it's structured. So, okay, next question, Andrew Anderson. Again, my question comes from having lived and worked in Bulgaria for 10 years, initially with the UN. At first, everything which didn't work was blamed in the communist past, where there were much deeper traditions and culture from Ottoman times. Isn't Germany very diverse? Yes. More so, say, than France and England. And I would agree with you there. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like that. I mean, you see that Bavaria has like a very like strong identity in itself, which isn't always like there's Franken and Franconia versus the Bavarians versus so there's a lot of diversity within the German um, structure itself. And that's like goes back to like the idea of nation building, which isn't really, like this pan-European sort of or pan-German kind of identity where people can connect and feel themselves German and feel a sense of pride of it that hasn't really taken place. So or hasn't been enough. So like I think that makes it like difficult. But the thing is because it hasn't really been done in a proper way, like that I think it can be that it doesn't take a lot to like just sort of create some traditions. Will and I had this idea of like June 17th as another national holiday, which would be an opportunity to honor East Germans and their fight for freedom, which West Germany didn't have to fight because it was given to them by the Western Allies. And then also you could make the topic of borders that still exist within Germany and not just between East and West, but like you're saying, between different parts of Germany. Okay, move on to the next one. Theo Marinos is make a statement, said to be a strong military power, you need money for equipment and personnel itself. The German state is already in debt. If the economy does not pick up, the debt will increase or programs will be canceled or both. No one or too few people will want to serve the armed forces. Where and what are the solutions? Yeah, there's a huge debate in Germany about the Bundeswehr and about military conscription right now. And that goes back to the idea of identity. Like, is there an idea of Germany that people are willing to fight for? And especially when you're asking young people to potentially fight and die for a country, which is taking more from them than it's really offering them. And that goes back to the idea of like economic choice. That's why you see in the youth of Germany, you see like that's more polarized than the rest of the country. The youth either votes AfD or the left by a majority. So very little for the political center. And so that's a huge problem. If you're losing the youth, the youth is becoming polarized. So, and that's why I think like one of the solutions is just to develop like a stronger sense of identity. And showing where the pathway is. Like that's the idea of like the German dream that like you have, like if you would be building homes that say, if you do your, obligatory years, mandatory year, that you get like a pathway or like you don't have to be like the state will take over your down payment, something like that, to give more people a stake in the system. I think that's important because if you don't have that, you're just basically asking people to, they're already having to like pay for pensions for older people. So, I mean, I also think like in terms of like the military power aspect is that like because the marketing around the Bundeswehr is that it's like boots on the ground, it's grunts, it's people, with a gun in their hands rolling rolling around in the dirt. And I think if like Meredith is talking about like building Europe's strongest conventional army, but what about building Europe's smartest army? Like, what about the highest tech army? You know, what about the most like capable combat drones? You know, and that a Bundeswehr is a highly skilled technician instead of like, you know, somebody wearing boots and fatigues and, you know, that, you know, so if you create the Bundeswehr as the high tech, you know, as also industrial policy, then I think you kind of change the dynamic that it becomes like aspirational to work for the Bundeswehr instead of like, okay, I can learn how to set up a tent in the rain. That's not that.
I'm so sorry, but we really need to wrap up
Yeah.
now. And
Sorry.
maybe you can make a final statement and then we can just, end this very interesting discussion.
Okay.
I
I'll just
think
say like if anybody if anyone wants to like email me, I'm happy to like, you know, answer these questions that we didn't get to. So apologize for the shortage of that. You know, there's my website, chrishreiter.com. You know, you can or just email me. Fine. So go ahead, Will, and then I'll.
No, thank you very much everyone for listening in. And we didn't get a chance to talk about Britain and how it's in a similar situation, but I think I think one reason we wrote this book is we care deeply about Germany and think that actually part of the reason for writing it is because Germany must have like a leadership role in Europe and the wider world. And I think there's also so many amazing things about this country and its people and the dynamism and the work ethic and the creativity that I think it can be fairly optimistic that at some point German society will turn itself around and be a beacon for others. It's just a question of how much down this fractious and dark road we need to go before that happens. That's everything.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so like just to follow up with Will, thank you everybody for paying attention. Thank you, Andra, for the moderation, and thank you, Tamara, for the opportunity. And you know, like we hope the book is also the beginning of something and not the end of something. So you know, so please follow us and stay in touch. And thank you for your interest.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
evening. Take care.
Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Bye.
Dankeschön.
Andra.